Welcome back to another episode of the New Future podcast. I have Elyssa here with me today. We're talking about mindfulness, mental health, and how this is very important, especially for engineers in our careers. Do you want to just give us a quick introduction on what you do and your business and your career as a young engineer and anything you want to share?
Yeah, so my name is Elyssa Dixon. I'm located in Seattle, Washington. I graduated with my degree in environmental engineering in 2012 and started working in consulting pretty soon after that. So I was in a few different consulting firms focused on remediation work and stormwater compliance, green stormwater infrastructure for about 8 years, and decided that something wasn't quite feeling right for me with all of that. So I left in January of 2020 to take a sabbatical, not knowing that a global pandemic was right around the corner. And through that process of reflection, I really realized that I get a lot of joy out of helping people. And that's something that's very important to my life. The idea of connection came up for me a lot when I was reflecting about that as something that I'd always done unintentionally, connecting people to each other, connecting people to ideas. My own experience with anxiety and depression and some other mental health stuff over my life led me to mindfulness practices. And I just started seeing a lot of value in my own life with that practice, but also value towards leadership and teamwork that I was utilizing as a project manager or within my volunteer work through ASCE. So, thinking about all of that, I decided that I wanted to help engineers with mental health, help them with their interpersonal communications, leadership, make teams better, and decided to become a mindfulness coach in the summer of 2020. So I started my own company then and have been doing that since then, leading workshops, talking to people about mindfulness from the perspective of an engineer.
Yeah, and I guess with that, like, how do you define mindfulness in the first place? I know you do a lot of meditation courses. You guide people through kind of guided meditations and help them. But like, what? How do you define mindfulness in the first place?
Yeah, great question. So I think my intro to mindfulness without really realizing it was through yoga. I was a
Hmm.
very stressed kid. I just uh, felt stressed all the time and went to a yoga class, I think in middle school, and wasn't really sure about it, but my parents were probably trying to find something to help me. And my high school actually had yoga available as a PE class. So I took it again then
Hmm.
and did a lot more practicing through college and after. And I didn't really realize it was a mindfulness practice at the time, but I did find it helpful. And I had done some meditation. I found Headspace when I was going through some really stressful periods, but I was having a lot of physical manifestations of stress. I
Hmm.
got some chronic headaches that ended up leading me to get an MRI. And because it was just trying to figure out what was going on, was having some digestive issues associated with health and food, and really trying to figure out what was going on with all of that. And I wasn't getting answers from doctors that made sense to me or that were helpful to me. So I was looking for alternative approaches to trying to manage some of particularly the reflux symptoms I was getting or some of the GI stuff, and ended up stumbling across a mindful eating coach and just what she was talking about on her website with intuitive eating. And I figured, why not? Let's give it a try. So I started working with
Yeah.
her, and that led me a little bit deeper into a more specific mindfulness practice and understanding that process more definitively outside of just yoga or occasionally meditating with an app.
Yeah, and I think especially like what you were saying, just kind of that aspect for engineers. I don't think we really think about it as engineers. We like our numbers. We like just being focused on work. How have you like break into that space of helping engineers be more mindful and help them with meditation and just with their mental health in general? How has that process been?
Mm-hmm. So I'm a why person, which I think is why I became an engineer. And I think a lot of engineers are why people. You want to understand what's going on, the deeper aspect of it. And for me, that's been understanding what's happening when I'm experiencing stress and how it's changing my body in ways that I'm not aware of. like I mentioned before, getting GI issues and headaches and just feeling overwhelmed and anxiety. And if I can understand that science and talk about the science of what's happening in my body when I'm experiencing stress and understanding the different types of stress, it's a foundation that I think helps a lot of engineers understand why it's important. You can't just change those things. You have to put practice
Mhm.
into them. If you're experiencing a lot of stress, your body is wired to respond in a certain way. And it's going to do that whether you want it to or not. And then understanding what's actually happening and how that's going to affect you long term is a whole other level. It's, you know, you feel stressed, you burn out, you maybe take a week off, you feel a little better, you go back to work,
Mhm.
and then 6 months later you burn out again. At least that's that's a cycle I've been through.
Yeah.
And I know it's not sustainable, or I knew it wasn't, but I didn't really understand
Mhm.
it. So knowing that there's things happening in our brains when we're experiencing stress, different parts of our brain are changing size, different neural pathways are being created. There's research that shows down to your chromosomes and your telomeres are actually being shortened when you're experiencing chronic stress, which blew my mind a little
Mhm.
bit to think at that low of a level, all this stress is really impacting me. But there's mindfulness is something that's been around for a decent amount of time. So there's research on mindfulness practices and how they
Mhm.
change our bodies as well. So if we understand that stress is changing our bodies, we can feel it to some extent, but we also maybe can't, depending upon the longer term effects. We can look at how mindfulness does the opposite of that. How if you take a mindfulness class and you start meditating or doing some other mindfulness practice, you can change your brain in the same way that stress is changing your brain because of the neuroplasticity of our brains. So for me, understanding all of that was really important, but being able to communicate that to engineers, you're getting down to the basic, the science, the why. It's not that it's just going to make you feel better or calmer. It's that you're actually,
Mhm.
excuse me, changing part of your system and your neurology and how your brain's wired, which in turn makes you more empathetic. It makes you more compassionate because the parts of your brain that are responsible for those functions are changing too.
Yeah, and I think something you were saying kind of resonated with me because I've kind of been going through this for a little while. Just I've been off kind of the podcast and everything for I think almost 2 months now, just because of that, just kind of being burnout, tired, stressed, anxious, all of those things. So I wanted to take that time off and really, really think about like, is this something I want to be doing? Is this something that is worth my time doing, um, or what I want to be doing with this? And I think with that just came seeking help, finding a doctor, finding just ways to be more mindful. I've on and off meditated in the morning, but started to do that more frequently, and has just helped me just control those anxiety things that obviously has reflected physically and mentally. And I've been taking a little more medicine and just therapy and just kind of doing the things that I can to feel better. Because at the end of the day, I need to take care of myself so I can take care of my family, so I can be better at work, so I can do all of these things. So I mean, it's hard when you are in the middle of it, trying to find the help, but I think it's important to seek that help. And the other thing I wanted to mention, and I wanted to ask you, is if you have done a lot, some like research, or have explored kind of the psychology behind it, and what our body can experiences when we're meditating and trying to find those mindfulness practices in terms of how it changes our mind and our body, and how all that goes.
Mm-hmm. First, I want to say I think it's wonderful that you talk about the tools that you're using to help yourself because it's not a one, it's not helping yourself, doesn't, it's not one path. It's, you have to look at
Mhm.
these are all the tools available to me, and this will help me in this way, this will help me in this way, this will help me in this way. And I've used therapy, I've used antidepressants, I've used, you know, mindfulness techniques, and they're all tools that help me get somewhere, help me work on different pieces together. And it doesn't mean that I'm on antidepressants forever. It doesn't mean that I'm seeing therapists forever, but looking at it holistically, I think is really important. So I appreciate you mentioning that because we're all different. We all need different things to help ourselves.
And
Um,
right, and I think not only that, but like what help works for me is going to be different than what works for you. So it's good to like explore the different options and like talk to someone that knows the different coping mechanisms and try to explore those different, either meditation, either an antidepressant therapy or exercise, or doing all different things that can help you be more calm, and just having that mindfulness present. I think it's important too.
Definitely. And with that, there are lots of different ways to practice mindfulness. It's not just meditating, it's not just yoga. It's you can walk mindfully, you can eat mindfully, you can bring it into the interactions you have. And ultimately, what you're doing with all of those, to go back to some of your question about psychology, mindfulness has a lot of different definitions, but I like to break it down into three major tenets. That's being present, which is probably one of the more commonly thought of concepts associated with mindfulness. Awareness, and that's self awareness, that's awareness of other people around you, and then suspending judgment. And I think the last one is
Mhm.
probably the hardest because we are wired to judge. That's just human nature, whether we're judging good or bad. We're categorizing things all the time. Is this safe? Is this not safe? And what mindfulness is helping us do is slow down and be present and increase our awareness, but also reduce our judgment and find the place where we're observing things exactly as they are without labeling or um, putting our own impressions on them. And that translates to so many different skill sets, and that we're able to be more open-minded, less biased, because we're practicing this just on ourselves and our own observations and things that don't matter. We're noticing our breath, we're noticing our body, we're noticing the sounds around us without, like, darn it, there's my neighbor upstairs is being really loud. It's, oh, my neighbor's being loud. End of thought. And I think that translates really well into the interactions that we have with people, because in the same way that we need different tools to adjust our mental health, we're all different. We communicate differently, we lead differently, we like to work differently. And that is important, to be able to have that awareness and recognize that how you might want to do something is different than how I might want to do it, but you're still going to get there just like I would get there. There are studies that a lot of universities have done around mindfulness, Harvard being one of them, where they did functional MRIs of people who took a mindfulness course called mindfulness based stress reduction, which is a really standard 8-week mindfulness training program. It's pretty intensive in that you practice for about 45 minutes a day and have like a 2-week or 2-hour meeting once a week with other people in the program. But it's standard curriculum, so it's good for doing research on. And they took these MRIs of participants while watching emotional content before and after completing this 8-week program. And they noticed changes in the brain just after 8 weeks of a
Mhm.
mindfulness practice. So your amygdala is the part of your brain that's that flight or flight center. It's that stress response, your limbic system. And when you're experiencing higher levels of stress, your amygdala increases because your brain says, oh my gosh, we need to put all our resources into this part of our brain. And it pulls the resources away from executive function and these other kind of systems. And that's the stress response. But when you have this mindfulness response, what they saw in this study was the size of the amygdala actually decreased a little bit after those 8 weeks, and the activation intensity decreased as well. Contrary to that, they were noticing
Yeah,
increases in
that,
size from uh, parts of your brain that are the executive function. So it's sort of allowing you to
mhm.
re-stabilize a little bit through that practice.
Yeah, I would always just find that just fascinating, kind of how our brain works. And I've read, I mean, a few books, just read to um, just like psychology behind like why some people are introverted and some people are extroverted, and how we are different, and how we respond to um, stimulation differently, and what goes kind of behind the scenes. Or like you don't realize you're doing something, but your brain is kind of working behind and doing all of these things that, if you don't understand that feeling, it's going to be hard to control it and act, and find that space where you feel like you're not anxious or depressed or have these feelings and around it. What are some of the practices that you have just teach your students and practice yourself that have helped you kind of cope with those anxiety and depression feelings?
Mhm. Um, so I think that meditation is a great place to start. with mindfulness practices because it is you're sitting still usually, your eyes are closed, you have less sensory inputs, and you can start learning what it feels like to let go of that judgment and to notice things exactly as they are without as many distractions. I recognize that that can be
Mhm.
hard for a lot of people to really just sit and listen to your thoughts. But there are different focal points that you can choose: your breath, your body. A mindfulness meditation is looking at those thoughts, letting them pass by. Guided meditations are really great to start too because you're not alone sitting there going, okay, how long has it been? What am I doing? Did I do it right? And
Mhm.
there's a lot of different resources out there, great apps, YouTube, Spotify. I lead free meditations almost daily. Uh, but when you've built that foundation through meditation, you can start bringing that mindfulness practice into different parts of your day. So I really like to bring it in with things that I know I'm doing every day. I may be weird, but I really like brushing my teeth. And it's an activity that I do twice a day. It's 2 minutes. My toothbrush times it all for me. And while I'm brushing my teeth, I can be paying attention to the sensation of the toothbrush in my mouth, the taste of my toothpaste, noticing those things where my feet are on the floor and not scrolling through my phone while I'm doing it. Or sometimes I, in the past, would be cleaning up while brushing my teeth, walking around multitasking a little bit. Washing dishes is
Right.
another good opportunity because you have this set activity. You're moving and doing something, but you can bring your awareness into that space. Eating is also another great option because we tend to multitask while we eat a lot. I think from my experience, so
Mhm.
like, oh, okay, I don't have a lunch break, so I want to go home at 5 or whatever. I gotta get my food in, and it means that we end up not paying attention to what we're eating, how much we're eating as well. You don't actually get to enjoy the food you're eating if you're not noticing it. So being able to take the 5 minutes even or 10 minutes where you just turn your laptop off, put your phone on silent, flip it over, and really actually pay attention to the sensations of the food as you're eating them makes lunch more fun and gratifying, and your body can better tell you when it's
Yep.
full, but it's also a mindfulness practice.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think not only that, but I think, I mean, for me, getting meditation has helped a little bit, kind of right away in the morning. Because I mean, sometimes, like, I don't know, I wake up and I'm really anxious. Like the day hasn't even started, I'm already like feeling anxious. So having that quiet time in the morning has been helpful for me, and just doing an exercise. I really enjoy going working out for an hour, half an hour, and just kind of burning some steam before kind of the day starts and before everyone kind of wakes up around the house. So I think those two things have helped a lot. I've tried going out for walks, but obviously during the winter is a little harder to do that when it's not super nice outside. So some of those things have helped me just kind of at least calm those anxiety feelings and help me just not be stressed and overwhelmed during the day. Also try not to like scroll through social media all day long and waste time that way. So those kind of some of the things that have worked for me for sure.
Those are all really good.
Yes, and again, they work for me. They may not work for other people. So finding kind of the right thing to do, I think it's also important. I wanted to ask you, like, why did you decide to do these specifically for engineers? Obviously, you were an engineer that had practiced engineering. Why doing it for engineers rather than maybe focus on a different group or doing like some more general audience, if that makes sense?
Yeah, totally makes sense. I think having worked in a few different engineering spaces and been very involved with ASCE, I've seen a lot of engineers who are very stressed. Um,
Hmm.
the last couple of years hasn't helped anybody, but I
Hmm.
think a lot of engineers can be very selfless, which is great and part of the profession, but also means that we're not always taking care of ourselves super well. Um, I also just know what it feels like to be an engineer and be overwhelmed and trying to do so much, and being able to
Hmm.
speak from my experience and share how this has helped me with other people in that similar space was one of the things that led me to focusing more on engineers. speaking with some people outside of engineering, but that's definitely been my key audience so far. I also feel that engineering is so much more and so much deeper than technical skill sets. To be
Yeah.
effective as an engineer, you have to be able to communicate. You have to be able to work with diverse teams. You're working with the public sometimes. You're working with clients with different understandings and backgrounds. You're working with non technical people. And being able to be open minded and empathetic and unbiased in those interactions is so important. I think it improves engineering to be thinking more holistically about our projects so that we're trying to increase equity in infrastructure. Um,
Hmm.
big goal, but I think mindfulness practices and mental health can help get us there or change mindsets a little bit. Um, and being able to work with people who I can connect with because we have similar backgrounds and stories was important to me.
Yeah, and I think that makes total sense. And I feel like being an engineer helps you a lot, kind of understand what engineers kind of feel like during maybe a stressful season at work, or kind of what we should go through when we're just ingrained in just doing technical work. As of if someone else outside of engineering is trying to do the same, it's going to be harder for them to understand kind of the different variables of someone that has maybe a different way of seeing the meditation, the mindfulness. Maybe we're not as open to those things as maybe other professions. But having an engineer come in and talking about the science behind it, talking about what our bodies do when we're meditating, when we are taking the time to really be mindful, I think it's important. I think kind of that gives you a little advantage over other people that have maybe not that mindset of being an engineer. I think that's great. Do you want to just talk about a little bit about your resources? I know you have a few programs, a few courses and things you're working on, and yeah, just share those resources with us.
Yeah, of course. I lead a free meditation every morning at 8:30 Pacific time on weekdays and 9 a.m. Pacific on weekends. I have a specific meditation for engineers on Wednesdays at 9 o'clock in the morning Pacific time, and that's also free. Those are all about 15 minutes, so a great, I don't know what meditation is. Show up, no experience needed.
Yeah.
The other big thing that I've got right now is a mindful management program, and that's taking a look at some of the concepts that we've talked about tonight and how you apply this mindfulness practice to leadership, to teamwork, to your company culture, being able to integrate some of these ideas in a very practical way into the workspace around
Mhm.
how you're leading, how you're meeting with people, how you're interacting individually or with teams. We talk about emotional intelligence because that ties a lot into mindfulness practices and what emotional intelligence means and how you can work on improving your emotional intelligence. Talking about kind of leadership specific skill sets, how you grow mindfulness practice with practices given to you or tips along the way.
Mhm.
And that's about a 4 month program, depending. So you really get a chance to dive in and experience all of it because I think one of the big things from my perspective with mindfulness is that it's a practice. It's like learning any new skill set. It's you wouldn't go climb a mountain without doing some training in advance or buying the right
Mhm.
equipment or um, talking to other people about their experiences with it. You're not going to learn a new instrument or sport or a new technical skill set and expect to immediately be good at it. It takes time. It takes exactly like you were saying, we're all different. So figuring out how we um, work best with it, doing that experimental phase of practice. What time of day? How long? What type of practice? And being open minded to all of that.
Yeah, I think that's great. I'll make sure I'll link some of that stuff, your website, and everything on the description below, and people can reach out to you if they have any questions. I always like to ask guests, what are some of the favorite books that you are reading right now or read recently? And obviously, if they're related to mindfulness, that'll be very fitting for the episode today.
Yeah. I'm currently reading a book called Permission to Feel, which is from the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence and really good framework for understanding emotional intelligence. There's another book that I've been working through a little bit slowly called Full Catastrophe Living, which is by John Kabat-Zinn and kind of the the main guide of mindfulness. And it's a beefy book, so that's why I've been going through it slowly. But it's a good reference point for a lot of different mindfulness practices. The other book that I read most recently that I've been telling everybody about is called Make Time. And it is about
Yes.
time management using a really wonderful framework laid out. And I feel like mindfulness applies to all of these spaces because your awareness of where you're at when you're coming into this and how you respond and integrate those things is important. But I liked that book a lot and that they give you a lot of practical tips that you can take what works for you and leave behind what doesn't, and then get more time back to meditate or have other
Yeah.
practices or be more present in your life. So
Yeah, Make Time is a great book. I haven't heard of the other two, so I'll have to add them to my list and read them. Do you have any last thoughts, any last things you want to share with us before we end up the episode?
yeah, start. Just try it. Meditating's not scary. Mindfulness is not scary. It's helpful. If you are struggling, you're not alone in struggling. I think all of us have something going on in our heads at some point, and there are people out there to help or to commiserate with or talk with. Um, I'm always available if you email me randomly, but I do think that recognizing that we all have to work through something in our lives is important, and it's never too late to start trying something new.
Yeah, and I've done, I believe, two other episodes just related to mental health and that. So I'll try to link those in the description if you want to check them out. But I just want to thank you for coming to the episode and coming to the podcast, talking about all these. That is, I think it's very important. Again, something I've been struggling with in the past few months, but it's always great to just share that information and hopefully other people don't feel like they're alone. They're going through these alone because there's always a lot of people kind of going through that, but not enough people are sharing that information. So again, thank you for all you do. I know a lot of people benefit from it, and I know I enjoy just watching your content and see you grow in your business. Where can people find you online if they have any questions, if they want to reach out, if they want to find some of your courses, some of the things you're doing?
Yeah. So my business is called Fleece and Forests, and that's because I'm from the Northwest and I love being outside in fleece and forests, but there's a whole bunch of other stories behind that name. So my website is fleeceandforests.com, and you can find me on Instagram in a few different places, but more recently at Engineering Your Mind with periods between the words.
Sounds good. Yeah, well, thanks so much for coming to the podcast, and I'll talk to you later.
Thanks for having me.